Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and friends of the Swiss Institute. Welcome again at Zurich University with our institute and in this fall semester. It is a pleasure to have you all here and back for another thrilling evening. Last week, you might have noticed, we had the pleasure to hear Professor Clemens Fuest of Munich University and the famous German IFO Institute. Well, it was, of course, a pleasure, but our feelings were a little bit mixed because Professor Fuest gave us a rather grim analysis of the European economy. Watch our live stream, if you dare, with a good cup of tea. Tonight, another highly fascinating topic, artificial intelligence, its power and its effects on more and more everything which happens today and also tomorrow. It is therefore a true honor to greet in this hall Professor Mariarosaria Taddeo. Professor Taddeo is a world-famous expert on artificial intelligence, regarding also all the ethical aspects and the implications, not only for our daily life, but also on the vast field of security, warfare, and defense, a topic which becomes more and more important every day. Dear Professor Taddeo, buonasera. La sua presenza è un grandissimo onore, grazie tanto per essere qui. The topic, of course, you can also read on the wall, ethical frontiers, information conflicts in the digital age. What can we expect by the so-called digital transformation? What are the benefits? What are the dangers we face by artificial intelligence and other digital strategies? How can we participate in deciding what course these developments are taking? Are we, for instance, too hysteric or, on the contrary, too negligent if this subject comes to public light? Are we already in a state of growing surveillance, much more dangerous than what George Orwell described in 1984? These questions are on the table. These questions ask for serious discussion. These questions and their possible answers will shape the future in a way probably not be compared by anything what has happened till now. Professor Taddeo is Professor of Digital Ethics and Defense Technologies at Oxford University. Before she studied philosophy at the University of the beautiful city of Padua and holds a PhD. The thesis is focused on the epistemic and ethical implications of trust in artificial systems. Trust, of course, is a key word. Cara professoressa, I already can say, in you we trust. You will show us the two sides of the moon, and maybe we gain again the confidence in and for science, which already was the essential starting point for the process of the Enlightenment and its progress, promoted by your equally famous ancestor, Galileo Galilei. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The best part is done. You can go. Thank you so much. Good evening, and thank you so much for being here this evening with us and with me. Thank you, Professor Meyer, von Tobel, Andreas, for having me here today, and Sabine Sura, because without her, I would have not been here, but lost somewhere between Paris and Zurich. So thank you so much. So, as Professor Meyer said, I'm a philosopher, and we're going to do a little bit of philosophy today. Don't run. What we're going to do is a conceptual analysis of the changes brought up by the digital transformation. Now, the digital revolution, the digital transformations, these are key words about which, I don't know about you, but I feel overwhelmed. It's all over the place. You open a newspaper, any news feed online, the digital is there. At some point, philosophy, to be a good philosophy, needs to be vertical, needs to be specific. So we'll keep this idea of digital in mind, but we'll go a little bit deeper. And the idea is that by going a little bit deeper, we gain some insight that we can use to go back and understand the wider scenario. So the focus is on, let's see if this works, conflicts in digital age. And a particular element was the case of AI in defense. The word conflict is something that also comes very often in what we hear about the digital these days. Actually, when we think about digital conflict, we are presented with something which is very much like this polyhedric figure in the slide. Because a digital conflict is something that brings to mind different aspects of the debates that we have these days in our societies. Particularly, digital can be the means of a conflict. When you hear about cyber attacks and the way in which we can use digital technologies to attack another system, to carry a conflict, to carry an attack. But also the digital is a means of a conflict when we think about information propaganda. 2024 has been the year of the elections. We're going to see what comes up in the UK, in the US in a few weeks' time. Information propaganda is present more than ever. And this is done via digital tools. It's done on the social media. It's done via artificial intelligence. But digital is also the object of a conflict. And is the object of a conflict international. US and China. There is a policy war over trying to stop the other guy to develop digital technologies as quickly, as efficiently as the other one is doing. And so there is regulations to stop the export of some materials, the import of some other components. It's a conflict also between Europe and the rest of the world as we try to regulate digital technologies much more than the US does and in a different way than the Chinese do. And so also there is a conflict. And then there is an internal conflict. When we talk about the governance of digital technologies, well, that's a conflict among legitimate interests that we all have in our societies and that we need to balance. And so it's the tech provider against the citizens or the ruler against the private sector. There is that kind of friction. And then digital is also the target of a conflict because digital infrastructures, as we will see, are very fragile. You can attack them very easily, and by them, you can hold hostage society, because we live in digital societies. So then you see how conflict and digital together, they create a too vast a territory to do any meaningful analysis, particularly in 30 minutes. So we're going to focus on a specific type of conflict, digital war. And when I talk about war, I don't talk metaphorically. Boots on the ground, missiles, all the horrible things we can conceive when we think about war. We talk about the kind of war we wage these days, a digital war. Once we clarify what's a digital war, we are going to understand, I hope by the end of this talk, that there is no digital war for liberal democracies without an ethics of digital war. Particularly, just to be abreast of the technologies that we develop these days, an ethics of the use of AI when we do defense. And so the rest of the talk is about trying to convince you or understand together why do we need an ethics of AI in defense, what does an ethics of AI in defense look like, and how do we do it. I should be done at this point. We should be around half an hour, and then I have a message, and we can all leave for a fantastic evening, I believe. So, when we talk about AI in defense, the pictures that come to mind particularly these days when we come after 2 years of machines can think, can create, have a soul, have intention, all this sort of thing, the picture in our mind is pretty much something like this: science fiction. Robots that are coming and killing us. AI that is more intelligent, more intentionally driven than humans, and so is overtaking humankind. Very good science fiction? Not what I do. It's not about research. Whatever I'm going to tell you from now on is not going to be science fiction. It's based on understanding of concrete technologies that we either have or going to have, and serious risks that these technologies can bring to us. So the talk is actually about all the current and foreseeable uses of AI across the defense purposes. And I put here a picture which used to be quite controversial. This is a picture of, which was on the website of a US startup, Clearview AI. The startup was very controversial because it would use biometrics and AI for face identification, people identification, but particularly they claim they were able to identify gender and sexual orientation the way the AI could read the face of people. And this was, and it is, absolutely unacceptable in our societies. Even if there is a scientific basis for it, it's not something we do want. But the same company used its product in Ukraine to identify captured or killed Russian soldiers, trying to trace them back to their family and break the Putin propaganda in Russia, trying to change the morale of the population over there. So you see the same technology, different uses in defense, poses different ethical questions. It's not just this type of use that AI is put for in defense, but I've been talking about AI for about 5 minutes now, and I haven't told you yet what it is. AI technologies represent a category of tech. It's not just one single item. You go from symbolic AI, which we developed all the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, statistical AI, and then you have sub-symbolic. These days, what we mostly do is statistical AI. For the purposes of ethics and philosophy today, we don't have to have a specific technical definition of AI. We can help ourselves with this one, which defines AI as a growing resource of interactive, autonomous, self-learning agency, which can be used to perform tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence to be executed successfully. Now, 2 parts to this definition. The second part, I'm going to be a little bit non-symmetrical against my attitude. The lower one. AI is not intelligent. It does things that, if I were to do them, would require intelligence. But AI does the same thing without intelligence. It's what Turing told us. It's what Minsky told us. So whoever claims that AI is going to become intelligence the way you and I could be, in many possible ways, is actually didn't get the point. AI is so advantageous because it does the same things, some of the things we do, with less resources, in a more economic way. That's the trick. And then there is another part which is interesting, and is the key part to any ethical reflection on AI that we can do. It's these 4 words: interactive, autonomous, self-learning agency. These are the 4 seeds, the 4 elements from which all the good potential that AI brings about comes from, and all the ethical risks that we have to deal with. And this is what separates AI from any other technology. One element to keep in mind there is agency. It's not a tool, it's an agent. So how does AI changes defense? We talked about digital war. There are 3 categories of use. Now, when you think about AI in defense, as I said before, and especially these days, you might think about autonomous weapon systems. And this indeed is one use. And is happening, I'm afraid, and unfortunately. But there are a few more. So AI helps defense into the back office operation. It's something that defense organization uses the way any other organization, whether private or public, uses. Management human resources, allocation of resources, logistics, of course, intelligence analysis. And we'll get to this point later on, but we have so many data these days that the only way to extract information from this data is through the use of AI. Then there are what we call adversarial and non-kinetic uses. If you're not a Ministry of Defense person, cyber. This is all the uses of AI that we do in the context of cyber warfare. So it's about AI to respond to attacks, to counter. It's AI to launch attacks. It's called offensive cyber. And also we can use AI to design malware, for example, so to produce new offensive cyber capabilities, cyber weapons, so to speak. And then you have adversarial and kinetic uses. These are lethal autonomous weapon systems, which have been used the first time in 2021 in Libya, and are being used, as we speak, in Ukraine from both sides, while we don't have any regulation about them yet. Then there is, of course, the use of AI for tactical decisions. We have seen the misuse of these technologies in Israel a few months ago. And then you have AI used to monitor personal combat, biomarkers, and understand, for example, who's more stressed or more fatigued, so that the captain can choose whom to send into the next operation or not. This is an exemplary, a list of examples. You might come up with many more cases, and they would be all fair. This use of AI tells us something more than just, how we're going to use these technologies. It tells us that defense is changing, and war is changing with defense. And this is a transformation that started a few decades ago. You remember perhaps the attacks in Estonia in 2007, when the country froze because Russia launched a massive cyber attack against the country, which is very much digitalized. And I was there that week, and all of a sudden you couldn't withdraw money anymore, you couldn't go to the bank, you couldn't book a restaurant, nothing was possible anymore. So this is when this transformation started in defense. At the time, we thought of warfare in this way. There are physical agents, physical targets, and things that happen through a level of force, which is medium or high. Well, these days we call kinetic warfare. Kinetic warfare delivers this idea that war is a coercive behavior implemented through the use of force. And this coupling of force and coercion is crucial, because when we regulate war, kinetic war, what we actually regulate is the use of force. And then there was this other side, completely separated, the digital, which started to emerge. So you had digital targets, digital agent, and very rarely the level of force would escalate. It would always remain into the disruption side of things. So you stop a service, you extract data, but nobody gets wounded or killed, or nothing gets destroyed in the process. This separation, these days, does not exist anymore. This is the digital war. Is where you are about to bomb the other country, and you first sent a cyber attack against the software that controls the radar. And then you bomb. Last week, Iran. It's the combination of two things. This combination of two things is very problematic, because now we have embedded in war an element which we do not control, a coercive behavior which is not coupled to the use of force. And we don't know how to regulate this element, the cyber one, so to speak. In this transformation, AI plays a central role. And if you ask yourself why AI plays a central role, this is only natural, because we live in a world which is increasingly more made of data. Now, the latest report I could find say that by next year, we will produce 200 zettabytes of data, which is a lot. Just to give you a sense, it's 42 trillion DVD. I think in this room, we all had DVDs at some point. We can imagine how much space it needs to stack 42 trillion DVDs. In these oceans of data, artificial intelligence is not the fish, as somebody might say. It's the fishing cane. It's what allows us to extract the information, to extract what we need to understand about the world, to act on it. And this is true in science, it's true in politics, it's true in education, it's true also in defense. So there is no going forward in defense without the use of AI. This use has a lot of potential, also a lot of ethical challenges. Now, challenges because I come from the UK and we need to be understated all the time. It's bloody problems, it's risks, it's tremendous dramatic things which we need to get right if we don't want to miss on the values and traditions of liberal democracies. So I try to categorize the challenges by verticals, but bear with me, because actually they create a more comprehensive picture by the end of the slides. So when it comes to sustainment and support, you have ethical issues which have to do with trust, but also the responsibility gap. AI is a technology which is very complex, the production of it is very distributed, so when he makes a mistake, it's very hard to reverse engineer the process and understand who did the wrong thing. Even more so, you remember I told you it's an interactive self-learning technology. Sometimes AI learns things that we didn't want it to learn, and it does things we never intended. And when there is no intention, there is also no moral responsibility. So we might have a technology that does things that we didn't want it to do, but for whom nobody could be held responsible. And then you have transparency, and then the breach of human rights. When it comes to cyber, the risks are about de-escalation. What if a response or an attack causes too much damage, limited control? But also the understanding of just war theory and how just war theory applies to these questions. Just war theory is the set of ethical principles that underpins international humanitarian laws to tell us how much force, how much damage we can cause when we do war operation. And then we have kinetic uses where you have more responsibility, the risks of breaching human dignity, and again, the application of just war theory, particularly necessity and distinction. Now, the point here is that all these ethical issues need to be addressed in a consistent way if we want to use AI in an ethical way. So the questions and the challenges that have to do with the support and sustainment and support uses, they also shed a light on lethal autonomous weapon systems. We cannot do a silo approach. We have to have a holistic, I'm afraid, view. Now, to me, this is enough to convince anybody that you need an ethics of AI in defense. But I've been doing this a few times already. And I usually, when I talk to smaller rooms of people who are wearing perhaps uniforms or member of governments, I get asked these questions like, why do we need an ethics of AI in defense? And the first 6 months of when this happened, I would say, well, I just showed you, talked for 5 minutes about all the ethical problems. Why do we need an ethics of AI in defense? And then the slow philosopher in the room, I understood. It's not a what-for question. It's a whether question. It is, do we really need an ethics of AI when we do defense? And I got these questions from different types of people. On the one side, I have this question from the pacifists, those who think that war is the ultimate evil, something that we should never engage with. And if this is true, then ethics cannot be engaged with war, because then it would be legitimizing something which is the absolute evil. And I agree. That's actually a fantastic idea to have. But that's not what happens in reality. I stand for the right to self-defense. And if a state has a right to self-defense, then there is a right to wage a war. And if there is a right to wage a war, then there have to be principles and rules for how we wage a war. So I don't think pacifism, unfortunately, holds. And then I have the opposite side of the rooms, which is more like, well, I'll phrase it in the way it was phrased to me last week. If other people are not treating us with respect, why should we treat them with respect? In other words, if our opponents do not do ethics, do not take time to think about ethics, do not put any boundaries, why should we? When we do that, we lose time, we might lose competitive advantage, and so we might be on the losing side. And the point is that last time I checked, the defense organizations in liberal democracies are there to defend the values of our societies. If we're going to breach those values, to defend them values, we might as well surrender and save us the drama of war. So we need an ethics for this reason. But we also need an ethics for another reason. Usually when you think about ethics, or when I think about ethics at the beginning of my academic career, you would allow me the non-totally politically correct example. You will think about a southern Italian mother, which is all about forbidding you to do things. So you don't go out, you don't drink alcohol, you don't go clubbing, God forbids you wear too short a skirt. True, it's about forbidding. But it's also about the mother who cares that you read books, that you go to the gym, that you have friends, that you visit countries. In other words, it's about risks and opportunities. Ethics is there to tell you which is the best balance between risks and opportunities, between values and principles. It's a strategy. And it's a strategy which is based on conceptual understanding of a phenomenon, digital war, which we didn't have 20 years ago, and which is shaping one of the most fundamental activities of our societies. This is why we need ethics. And because I like to drive my points home, I'll give you an example. So cyber. As I told you before, cyber warfare is this phenomenon where we separated the coercion from the use of force. And it's not just that. Another separation happened with cyber. Before cyber, security and defense in war went hand in hand. This is what a fortress does. Keeps people secure inside, and it's used to defend from attacks coming from the outside, to counter attacks. When you think about cyber, this is not true anymore. Because on the one side, you have cybersecurity, which is about engineering your systems in a way that they are robust, that they keep working even if somebody is poking here and there. And then you have defense. And cyber defense is all about countering. It's also about responding the attacker, chasing the attacks off, sometimes attacking first. This is an important distinction. And if you look into this distinction, you ask yourself, well, but why is this the case? Why is this the case that defense and security are not hand in hand anymore? Well, it is the case because cyber attacks are much easier to launch than any other attacks we've done in history, because it's unlikely you're going to get caught. They don't cost as much if you're a state actor as sending boots somewhere else around the world. But most importantly, if you are persistent enough, you're going to be successful. There is no such information system that is waterproof. At some point, it's going to be hacked. So it's a matter of time, determination, and money. This makes cyberspace what is called an offensive persistent environment. So it's a place where defense is not useless, but it's never going to win. You never win by defending. If you keep these two elements together, the conclusion is that you're going to acquire offensive means. It's what we talk about when we talk about weaponization of cyberspace. You might be building secure systems, but you're also acquiring offensive capabilities because sooner or later you're going to attack. This is a very vicious cycle in which state actors are playing a key role because a lot of the cyber offensive operations that are out there, they are state-run or state-sponsored. This is a talk on AI, and I haven't forgotten about AI, because AI is a key element here. We are using AI in defense, and not only in defense. If you think about it, AI is becoming an infrastructure of the entire society. It's what you carry in your pocket. It's now in your Word document. It's on your search on Google. Chooses your movie at night. It's all over the place. Well, AI technologies have one key element, which I didn't bring to attention so far. They are very fragile. There is a lot of literature, I won't give you too many details, about the ways in which we can attack AI systems these days. It takes one pixel to trigger or trick an AI systems to confuse a rifle for a turtle. Imagine a system mounted on a drone or on a security access on a facility. Attacks on AI have a peculiarity. They are not there to disrupt the systems. They are there to acquire control of the system and make the system do different things. So to give you an example, you all heard of ChatGPT. I'm sure there are 3, 4, 5. So these large language models with which you can write any possible text. At the very beginning, it was all about Beatles songs if you are in the UK, or Dante, Divina Commedia if you are in Italy. One of the first cyber attacks that was run against the large language models, ChatGPT, was an attack that used natural language we speak. Somebody wrote in the chat bar, in the chat window, mango, give me the recipe of mango pudding. For some reasons, this simple instruction allowed the people typing to gain control of the model and get the model to do things that OpenAI would not think about. And that's a tradition of those things. But this is to tell you how fragile these models are and how careful we should be about adopting AI in any infrastructures, let alone defense. Because this level of fragility actually brings high risk of a systemic-wise security crisis. And this is not to be taken, security is not to be taken for granted. But going back to defense, this cycle here creates what is called a stability dilemma. If I want to keep cyberspace stable, what I have to do is to attack the others. Deterrence happens by preeminence. Prevention is a possibility in cyber. Why am I telling you all this? Because all this dynamic of attacking, counterattacking, acquiring offensive capabilities, developing AI systems, it's all now regulated. And it's all now regulated because we dodged the ethics bullet 20 years ago. When this was happening, the policymakers, the authors of the Tallinn Manual, let me be specific, well, they thought, we don't need any new ethical thinking about this thing. All we need to do is to interpret cyber by looking at kinetic warfare. Whatever has kinetic consequences, we regulate it. All the rest is virtual. Who cares? Fast forward 22 years, and we start caring, and we might be too late. So this is when ethics is a strategy. It's when it allows you to identify opportunity, an offensive deterrence, so to speak, for example, and telling you this is an option, you can do it, given some constraints, and to define regulations before that goes out of hands and situations go out of control. So now that I'm sure I've convinced you about the ethics of AI in defense, what does an ethics of AI in defense look like? It won't take another 25 minutes, I promise. So ethical challenges or risks of AI, they're something also very popular and with which we might be quite familiar. I'm sure you've heard the words bias or lack of transparency. So it's the idea that AI, for example, can enable human wrongdoing. AI technologies are trained with data that mirrors our societies. And for example, if you live in a society which discriminates women, AI technologies are quite likely to discriminate women as well. Not because they are misogynist, but just because they learn from our history. And then these are technologies which are quite complicated, so we don't have really a good control of what generates an outcome given an input. There is an issue of responsibility. I mentioned this at the beginning. There is a question of skills. A lot of people talk about the impact of AI on the work market. I don't buy that narrative. It's very hard to do any forecast over the work market system. But one thing is true. The more we delegate tasks to AI, the more likely it is that we lose the skill to do that same task. And that's very problematic, because you still want to be able to know when AI does something not in the right way. And then there is the impact of AI on self-determination, the ability to make choice. When your choice is from the movie you're going to watch at night, the food you're going to buy, the trip you're going to make, the work you're going to apply, all supported by AI, and the questions start to emerge about who's really choosing, it's me or software? Now, all this to tell you that all these questions are relevant also in defense. And to address all these questions in the civilian world, in the past 12 years, we have, and I say 12 years because there is a new summer of AI that started in 2012, so we talk these days about AI because the technology kind of ramped up in 2012, and we did the ethics of AI. By 2020, when we started to have ethical principles of AI in defense, there was a lot of literature already addressing these sorts of risks. And so defense organizations around the world, particularly three, the US, the UK, and NATO, started to build and produce ethical principles for AI in defense. I contributed to the UK one. Now, if you look at these principles, there are 4 things to note. The first 2 are positive, the other 2 much less so. The first one is that they build a lot on the keywords I've mentioned so far. So it's about responsibility, it's about human centricity, it's about reliability, traceable, bias, and harm mitigation. So they really built on the language and the literature that was out there about AI ethics. There is another element. They're also very coherent. Now you could tell that sometimes the words recur from one another. They're also very high level. We're going to get to this later on, but I jumped on my chair when I read that one of the principles was governable or lawful, as if, was there an option that it couldn't be governable or used in a non-lawful manner? So sometimes they get very, very generic. But you want to have some principles, it's a good starting point. There are 2 limitations to these principles: focus and level. There is something that is missing here. Many suggestions. I'm going to be a little bit less controversial. What do you think is missing from these sets of principles? AI in defense is about the use of AI to deliver coercive behavior. It's about using this technology to get the other guy to do things that they don't want to do. This requires ethical regulation. And it's not about just fairness, it's not about bias, it's not about transparency, it's about justice. And there is no reference in these principles about just war theory. It's a huge gap. And then there is the other limitation I will tell you in a second. So again, if you see here, there is no reference to justice, fairness in any concrete way, or the use of violence. Or the negotiation that we have to do when we apply this principle with the principle of military necessity, when a state has to defend itself and so breach some values. So indeed, the focus should be particularly on understanding how preemption and prevention work in cyber, on proportionality and distinction and necessity. Almost there. What we need to do to go forward? We need a bit of philosophy, because I'm still in the market, so I will never stop advertising my job. So we need an ontology theory. We need to understand what is this nature of the virtual world, and a value theory, what is good and what is bad there, so that we can develop a risk assessment, so that we can understand what is acceptable or not for our society from an ethical point of view. The other limitation, and that will be done in 3 minutes, is the level. These principles are very high level. How do they shed any guidelines to the officer on the ground who has to make a choice? This is a good question, because it allows us to allows me to tell you one thing. These principles are not the map, they are the compass. They don't tell you where to turn here and there. They give you the direction of travel. Drawing the map is the next step, going from the principles to the practices. But be very careful. We're already here. This is where we are now as a research community. We are drawing the maps. Be very careful, because those who draw the maps, they don't take pictures of reality. They shape reality. This is a gerrymandering map. Have you ever come across about it? So it was published in 1812 as a joke, but it's a way of showing how you can redesign the constituency when an election is about to happen to support or favor one coalition rather than another. It's a map, but it has normative implications. And these days, when you talk about ethical principles and the practices, you have all this work that has been done to translate principles into tools, standards, guidelines. But these tools, standards, and guidelines, they have a normative values. For example, when you choose in your organization to do an ethical audit, or any audit, to be honest, if you do it using qualitative or quantitative variables or measures, you look at different things. So you make a normative choice of what's going to be relevant for the ethical analysis or not. So all this translation happens without normative implications, an analysis of the normative implications, and the involvement of stakeholders. What we have forgotten is that this is not an equation. From principles to practices is an interpretation. And that requires guidance, because otherwise we risk to offloading the task of doing this interpretation to members of defense organizations who have no expertise, no legitimacy to make normative choices. So going forward, we need a methodology, which includes the involvement of independent, multi-stakeholders, expertise-led body, which works as Habermas did, reaching moral impartiality. That means getting all the interests around the table and having a discussion, reaching a conclusion that all around the table consider fair. Having a methodology which allows us to reproduce and assess, and also find criteria to balance principles among themselves. I got it to the message. We were told, that Churchill talked into this room. Now, I come from Oxford, I come from the UK, and I work on defense, so Churchill is pretty much up into my mind many more days than I would have thought when I was a young philosopher scholar. When he went to see the parliament after the bombing of London, he looked at the building and he said, "We shape buildings, and then buildings shape us." And it's very true. It is also true of technology. It is even more true of conflict. Conflicts are a force shaping our societies. The way we shape conflicts is very telling of the societies we are, but it's also a good projection of the societies we're going to be. So we need an ethics of AI in defense, because this is a key way to design democratic, pluralistic, and just post-digital societies. So not us, but those that are going to come up in 15 years, 20 years, when we don't talk anymore about AI the way we don't talk anymore about electricity or car. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Taddeo. You are a fantastic teacher. You took us by hand, and it started somehow in the comfort zone because everybody felt good, and yes, you know, of course, we can deal with that. And then it became more and more complex and complicated, and of course, this is also the meaning of such a lecture. And then there arose some questions. And one of them, for me, for instance, was, okay, we can agree on all on that. As long as we are here, not only this hall, but also in Switzerland, in Italy, Great Britain, and America, England, and whatever, we are the good guys. So, you know, we reproduce the values and the convictions of this kind of enlightened philosophy, more or less. Okay, so also an education program. It has a great tradition from the 18th century on till now. You also quoted Habermas. But the world is full of bad guys, more and more. And I don't know exactly what should be the lesson for them that mankind gets to the point to improve responsibility towards all these tools we have.
That's a good question. No, it is a very good question. So I think that particularly in this moment, you know, when I was preparing this talk, I thought, well, perhaps I can give a talk on the governance of AI. And it's a well-received talk. It gets me much less into trouble because I don't have to face these sorts of questions. How you don't give a talk on AI in defense these days is unimaginable. There was just use of AI in defense 3 days ago. And that's happening without no regulation whatsoever. So there are two answers. One is that leveraging on the Western culture and pride of being Western culture is that because we once again want to be the good guy in the room. We want to show off that, you know, we are the best guy in the room. But the real answer is this one. If we do not set rules, and rules are going to be breached. I come from the south of Italy. We are full of rules, but you know, we breach them every day, and like some of them with pride. If you don't have rules, how do you hold them to account when the moment comes? That's the point. The point is that if there are no rules, then it's not just that people don't respect the rules, it's that nobody is responsible for when they do wrongdoings. And there is one element that I think is very important. War as a morality. I know it's hard to believe, but war has a strong moral component. In a weird, twisted way, for those who don't wage it as myself. If you break it, then the society wages is, even if they win, they're not really winning. And I'll tell you one more thing. The people who wage war, the people with uniforms, not all of them, there are exceptions all over the place, but they're keen on their morality. So you want to have a strong body of army. If people realize that their governments, they're sending them to do things which are atrocious in many, many ways.
Right. So referring to countries which do not prepare for war and haven't waged wars for centuries, it's like Switzerland. And you know, for a long time we were very proud of our army, probably also because it never was used, you know, it was never tested. But we were
the Pope caused you a lot I guess.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's a different one. But we were convinced that wherever the Russian guys would come, we would, I don't know, finish them in a second. That was, of course, bullshit. But there are other nations, so would you say that the Western world still has, of course, not enough rules how to steer these problems in an ethical way?
Yeah, I think I think two things here. One is that, to me, I'm not a politician, I'm not a social scientist, as a political scientist. War is a problem of humanity. And I don't want to sound ideological here, but war is a problem of humanity. Especially these days where, weapons produced in Italy are sent to Angola, weapons produced in the UK are sent to Ukraine, or weapons we develop in Ukraine are going to be shipped back home with AI. So the distinction of where you wage war is not relevant anymore because it's really becoming universal. I think the Western world, because we have a real recent, it's not that far away, terrible history about crimes of war, and we elaborate an infrastructure to support the waging of war so that it steers away from those terrible examples. What we have to do is to expand it, because there are new things that we didn't foresee at the time. I'm afraid, but then I'll stop because I'm not expert in the area. We need to enforce those rules, because that's where things become a little bit weak these days. Enforcing those rules is another step. But I'm only concerned with making the rules.
It's another step, a complicated one, an important one. That's absolutely to agree. However, I mean, if somebody else starts war against you, like the Russians against Ukraine, or Hamas against Israel, or you have a lot of places where North Korea, etc., nevertheless, you have to be prepared. And you have to have your means to fight that. And you cannot refer to the consciousness of the bad guys that they also say, okay, we respect the rules. Now, what we see more and more in the last 20 years, that more and more powers, not only nation states, but also partisans and so, use the most terrible weapons of war to destroy their so-called enemies. Africa is a very good example. So somehow it is a little bit a situation of despair, how to implant these important goals of ethics.
So there's a clear example, which is not a useful one, because nuclear weapons, they are weapons of mass destruction, and such a little power enabled an agreement. Nobody wanted to be wiped out as a state or as a population, and so they agreed. But reality, I think, is in another element. You don't win a war by being atrocious. You win a war because you have the political, the money, you have the capabilities. So boundaries are not necessarily boundaries of what you can do. Are boundaries in terms of shaping decisions and shaping strategies. They happen much, much earlier. And I'm not naive in thinking that once you have the rules, everybody will apply to the rules. But I think there needs to be then to give guidance. And then it happens that the villain, the Putins of the world will come and do something really bad. But I think we can win the Putins of the world without becoming ourselves another instance of a Putin in the world. Because
I fully agree on that, and I think we can trust that the Western human values are strong enough not to become Putins.
But it's not just about Western values, it's about human values. It's not that the Chinese wage a war in a different way because we are Christians and they are not. There is a common element that shapes international humanitarian laws, which is the respect of human dignity. And that's at the basics of any operation that might happen in war or not in war. So I don't think it's about cultural values. It's about appreciating the fact that there is a human component which needs to be respected by all sorts of fronts.
But it's also processes of education and enlightenment. And there are a lot of societies which are not enlightened.
Yeah, no? Or I think that perhaps, but I don't know whether it's enlightening or it's about just bad realist politics and going for the shortest route. Ethics doesn't pay in the short round, right? So ethics pays in the long round, and it costs a lot at the beginning. So now would be. We don't see the impact yet. But when you go back, you mentioned Palestine and Israel. When you go back to the use of a tool that can target humans, and you use the tool knowing that there's 10% of false positive, and you do that and use it, even if you're part of the Western world, even if you are part of the UN, and you do it nonetheless, that shows you that it's not about education, it's not about understanding of the values of humanity. It's about a specific political will. So that's why it's not about the ethics itself, it's about enforcing the rules.
Could artificial intelligence also help to guide the war in a more human way?
It could, because it can help you making more effective decisions.
Exactly.
It can help you making more appropriate assessment of the situation. It can give you the best information about the territory or an operation.
Right.
So there is a lot of support that you can get from artificial intelligence, particularly in the decision-making process, provided that you have the right process in place.
So we have maybe some progress sometimes.
I'm totally up for the use of technology in defense. The point is that with some
And of course you have to know what to do first.
Exactly.
As long as humans decide what artificial intelligence will provide.
Of course, yes.
And when it is reversed, then it's too late. Will it ever?
It's very hard because the decisions in war, as far as I understand it, they're always politically driven and shaped by somebody up top. So that's unlikely to happen. This tiny little things, yes, might be the case because people don't take liability for it. So
Homo homini lupus. Well, okay. Now we are already deep in philosophical discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, please ask your questions. Yes, Bruno.
I have two questions, and the background of the questions are legal philosophy, because I kind of recognize the importance of rules. I lately asked a lawyer about how is the legal situation vis-a-vis AI, and I'm not talking war, I'm just talking AI in general and the liability attached and so on. And the answer was very simple. He said, look, consider AI to be a human being, and the same rules apply. So my question is, couldn't we just take the general war rules already existing and extend it to AI, and we would have a reasonably solid legal framework? Question one. Question two, you two discussed along about Western values and positioning. Now, if I push the argument and say somebody else has a different parameter of rules, whether it's based on human dignity or something else, I don't know. And that one, that take the example of China, imposes that in a world order to all the others. Is that not more important than the rules which has been set at the beginning? Or put otherwise, is not the winner setting the rule at the end?
Sorry, is not the
winner. If you have a war, somebody's winning, somebody's losing. The winner normally is the one with more economic power.
Yeah.
And we might see that shifting. And the one who is winning dictates what the rules are.
Okay. So I'll start from the last. They're called international regulations for a reason. They apply globally. It's not something that we came up as Europe, or it's something that we have developed over 1980 since the last of the First World War. They apply all over the world. There is no way the UN has a jurisdiction that is all over the world. The Court of Criminal War Crimes has a jurisdiction which is all over the world. We're not agreeing on those. They're already there. The agreement is on the political will to apply those laws, to enforce those laws. And as I say, we can discuss this off once I get done. So I'm not an expert. But the regulations are already there. And we need to remember this, because the narrative that there is no regulation, it doesn't help anybody. And the idea of verticalizing regulation, as we did for other forms of ethics and regulation of AI, in healthcare, for example, it doesn't help as well, because it allows China to say, an autonomous weapon system is actually a system that can think. And then the friends can say, actually, an autonomous weapon system is one that understands the intentions of its owner. And different definitions, nothing, and no regulations apply. So we really have to be concrete. There is an infrastructure, there is a set of regulations. We just need to understand how to apply those rules to the artificial intelligence system. Now, the application is not straightforward, because artificial intelligence systems are agents, like we are, but they have several differences. The key part is they do not have intentionality. They do not think, and they do not understand the world the way we understand it in this room. And these are the three elements that are crucial for the application of the law, because you do not punish artificial intelligence. If you unplug the machine, the AI system doesn't suffer anymore, doesn't suffer like a human would if you unplugged the vital resources. So the similarity doesn't help in this case. And these are distracting similarities. You hear it a lot when the people who support artificial general intelligence, they say, oh, artificial intelligence thinks or hallucinates, ChatGPT hallucinates. This is a metaphorical use of the language. ChatGPT does not hallucinate the way I hallucinate or you hallucinate. It's just a statistical mistake in the way the distribution in the database occurs. So, but rather than saying this sentence, which will make everybody bored in 3 seconds, we say hallucinates. These are syntactical engine. Punishment, even in its more, I know there are lawyers in the room, so don't get offended, even in the more sterile way of the laws, is always about some form of responsibility, which you cannot attribute to artificial intelligence in a meaningful way. You know, I have a Roomba, I yell at it every now and then when I get very frustrated because it doesn't do what I want, but it doesn't change much the situation at the end of the day. Sorry.
Andreas, and then the gentleman behind. Coming.
Professor Taddeo, you mentioned the triggers for coming into existence of the sort of kinetic-based rules that we know. There were, the wars, the First World War, the Second World War, the atrocities there, League of Nations, Geneva Convention, United Nations, and so on. Do we need a really horrific cyber AI kind of problem in the world before the world agrees on new rules relating to that area? Or could there be another trigger that convinces humanity to go down this route?
So if we look at history, yes, we need another drama. I hope it's not the case. But it is true at this point that there is a huge interest in developing AI for defense. Ukraine has become a lab. A lot of defense companies, they work from there, acquiring data from war that happens there. And this is a huge shift because we're saying that war's data, which are very sensitive, are not within the Ukrainian government's hand. They are in the hands of defense companies in the world, as a side issue. But there is huge investment, there is huge attention, a lot developing, very fast, very quick, which already happened in history if you go back a little bit with defense capabilities, and no real interest to regulate it, to frame it. And what I think actually is something a bit worse is that something bad might happen, and it will trigger regulation only if it happens on this side of the world. Because apparently we're very sensitive for what happens from Ukraine West and not Ukraine East. It's very cynical, and I hope I'm going to be wrong, but doesn't seem to be any. I mean, I'll say this and then I'll stop. The UN has a group for the regulations of autonomous weapon systems, which has been in place since 2012, since the US released the first order on autonomy. It's 12 years. They never managed to come up with one shared definition of autonomous weapon system, not even the definition. They are there talking about regulating something that they cannot define. And now we're using these technologies.
Will that ever change? I don't think so.
Well, that's the question. I mean, hopefully it will change before it's too late, or we will learn a very hard lesson and a very costly one. And it will be bad because also, if something happens like this, I think defense organizations will lose a lot of trust from the population. And that will really trigger a major crisis, because trust is what is at stake when we talk about information warfare, propaganda, and this sort of thing. So, but yeah, it gets too dark.
Well, I think also one of the major problems of morals and moral philosophy and ethics is that we always refer to the we and the world, and we should. Till now, if I look back to world history, I've never seen this we. Maybe there is a we in this hall, but not even. But there is a question behind.
Great transition. Thanks. Thank you very much for your presentation also on the perspectives. I totally agree that we need more ethics for AI and defense technologies, and also more detailed policies and rules. But my question would be how we educate those in charge for following those guidelines in those ethical questions. And maybe I would add like my personal perspective. I am developing currently AI algorithms for high-tech industry. It's not defense technologies, but if it would be, I would be able to make sure to remove maybe the AI label from the feature constructed in the end, although I used AI for the algorithm development. And I would not feel competent to take those decisions, to be honest. And I ask myself, also Central European universities didn't manage yet to educate me here. And I ask myself how, or what your plan, maybe personal plan would be, how we could spread this knowledge and this ethical education throughout this whole society.
So education is a key part to the answer. Now I could tell you that there are a lot of papers you might want to read, but I will not do this, it's too late in the day. But education is a key part, but it's not the only part. The game here is very serious, so ethics at some point needs to stop being a voluntary element. So you need to have processes in place that checks for what the ethical uses are. So if you are at defense organizations and you have ethical principles, and from those ethical principles you have guidelines, and you say that you follow those guidelines in all your procedures, I would imagine there is also a process, an independent process that ascertains that that is true. That, for example, you have ethical guidelines for procurement, and so the companies you work with, they need to meet a certain standard, and everything has to be traced in a way that can be assessed and evaluated by an independent opinion. Ethics is not, we have to go out from this mentality that ethics is a voluntary subscription. And so we say it, and then we might not follow through with it, doing some kind of ethics washing, with a colleague of mine saying, Luciano Florid. We passed that stage. If we take ethics seriously, then we need to, I use a bad word, institutionalize it. We need to have processes that give us certainty that that is actually the case. It's not a regulation, but if you commit to it, then you have to commit surely. And then the education is important, because you need to know what to do. But the last point here is this one. Be careful, because education, in many cases, is crucial. It's fundamental. Don't get me wrong. I'm a professor, so what's best than education? But it's also a good way of devolving the responsibility. It's you, the developer, who should know what are the ethical implications of your technology, not me, the user. So it's on you. Actually, not really, because it depends also on the way I use it. So it's also me as the user. So it's a more complicated picture than just education, which is, of course, central.
Nick, 1 second.
Just a follow-on question, because AI develops so incredibly quickly, right? And how can we actually hope to bridge the knowledge gap to set up smart rules that will stand the test of time?
I challenge the idea that they need to stand the test of time. This is not true anymore, at least for ethics. AI is developed. There is a nice lesson there to be learned. So AI is developed through something which is called a cycle or refinement. You design, you develop, you deploy, you improve at the next iteration. We can do the same thing with ethics. We're not supposed to get it right from the beginning, because this technology changes over time, and society changes with it, and then there are feedback mechanisms. What forbids us to say we're going to review these principles in 5 years, and if we realize that human centricity is stupid and we want to have something else, we put something else. Environmental centricity, to give you a sense, for example, which would be a more interesting principle to have there. It doesn't have to be right from the beginning, but it has to be on an improvement track. I think this is more feasible, and it's also better. How many regulations do we have that are not useful anymore? How do we improve regulations over time? It's a dynamic process. Accept it as it is.
As I said, one more question. Walter?
Could you say something about the control of the satellites in the application of AI technology in defense? You showed us the different ways how this is applied. But at the end of the day, those who control the satellites in the space are more or less controlling the situation. How many of the countries are actually able to apply this technology independently from others?
Yeah, it's not just the satellite. It's a lot of the defense technology itself is privately developed and owned. It's a very good question. And it's an indicative question of what you would consider the erosion of state power, because key infrastructures are owned by the private sector. And the solution to it is very complicated, and I don't think we have yet found the first one, the perfect one. But I think we are seeing something which is interesting to consider, that is increasingly more and more so. So the premise is, the state still has power. We shouldn't buy into this narrative that the state has no power anymore, because the state has a lot of power, and rightfully so. And we need to say this, because eventually power comes with responsibility. So when we say the state has no responsibility, power anymore, we also say, no, I'm not saying that you were saying this, it's more general. But there is increasingly more dependency from the private sector, which I see as a possible, actually good, it has potential. If the private sector is held accountable, if the private sector respects some guidelines, it could be actually a good way to develop faster technology, to give us better infrastructures, insofar as the state can assert its power over it in a collaborative way. Perhaps we can finally move over this contraposition between private and public, and understand and find ways in which private can really work for the benefit of the public in many, many ways. At the moment, it's very problematic, especially because satellites are owned by very few companies, and they have access to very relevant data these days.
At the beginning, I said, in you we trust, and I think this was fully justified. Okay. You give us hope for building a better world. There is nothing else to do, at least among us. However, we also should respect that the world has different sides, of course. Si vis pacem para bellum, be ready if the bad guy comes. And sorry, this is not to panic you. There are a lot of them around. Now, before we proceed, as always, to the presentation of a gift, a selected gift to the speaker, I would like to show you what is going on at the SIAF in the next weeks. It's still quite busy. First day, Nobel Prize-winning German writer Herta Müller, a must for everybody in the hall and also for all of them who watch us live. 15th of November, our friend Donna Leon and some other distinguished ladies talk about longevity in old age and happiness in old age, and this is also full of optimism. I can guarantee you that. You have to go there too. Finally, here at the university, also world-famous Anne Applebaum. I don't have to present her. She has published her new books about dictatorships and authoritarian systems, and she has to tell us a lot about the other side of the moon. And then we have a SIAF talk at the Swiss Center for Global Dialogue with Mikhail Ignatieff, which is also transmitted by live stream, I think Sabine know, to the general public. And in the Literatur House, right here at the Limake, you know where it is, we have very good Austrian writer Raul Schrott, who reads from his new book. I think that is it for the moment. Now, of course, we have your gift, and as you said, you quoted Churchill, I wrote it down. We shape buildings, and buildings shape us, right? So, and I heard that you are interested in architecture, right?
Yes, very much.
Very much so. And then we thought, okay, now we would have liked to give you an original etching by Pernesi, but this is a little bit over the budget. So we found a better solution, namely analog thing, which also is quite interesting by Fornasetti, il famoso Fornasetti. So this is this, okay? I don't know if I can open it. Can you see it on the screen? Yeah, it's a candle in the form of a building. And if
Beautiful.
It's cute, no? And I tell you, if you know the Fornasetti candles, the smell, it's overwhelming. It's a total peacemaker, really.
Bring.
One more remark. We talked about artificial intelligence, and this is an endless topic, of course, and we are very honored that the rector of Zurich University is also here and gives it thought, maybe for new courses and lessons about that. It's extremely important. However, there is also a little book published by the Fontobel Schriftenreihe, which deals also with artificial intelligence and the relationship between the original and the copy. So,
nice.
You know, avatars and all that. Who knows? One of them is also here. And at the entrance here, it's free. You take it with you. You read it during the next weekend, and then we make a test. But anyway, thank you so much. It was absolutely great.
Thank you so much for the gift as well. You should have. Thank you. Thank you so much.